Brian gets to a point where he talks about the sunset, claiming the sun hadn't even gone down yet.
To me, that just didn't jive with everything we knew about living on the water.
And then he would claim, out of nowhere, that it was pitch black and he couldn't see my mom. I tried so hard to picture that scene. In my head, trying to visualize it.
But the pieces of his story never fit together the way he described them.
Somewhere out in those open waters, my mom vanished. And months later, the painful questions about her disappearance only grow louder. My mother, Lynette Hooker, still hasn't been found. For me, for our family, and for everyone who loved her. That reality is a heavy, painful weight to carry every single day. Looking into everything, we have found people close to our family whose stories raise some very serious questions about my stepdad's official version of events. One of those people is Blaine Stevenson, a man who, along with his wife, befriended Brian and my mom back in 2023 while sailing in Florida. What started as a friendly bond eventually led Blaine to question everything he knew about what happened to my mom. At first, Stevenson had no reason to doubt Brian's story, but over time, and through a series of direct conversations with Brian himself, massive inconsistencies began to surface. Details that, to Blaine and to me, simply do not add up. He also shares a deeply troubling concern that so many of us have. Why on earth is there no active search happening for my mother? If you are just learning about our story, let me share some background. My mother and Brian, originally from Michigan, were living aboard their boat, Soulmate, when tragedy struck my family in the Bahamas. Brian told the police that on April 4th, after they left Hopetown around 7:30 p.m., rough, choppy waters caused my mom to fall from their dinghy. He claims he paddled all night, hitting Marsh Harbor entirely alone at 4 in the morning, unable to find her. Bahamian authorities held him for 5 days before releasing him. He immediately fled the Bahamas, despite promising us he would stay and search. Where he is now remains completely unknown. Through his attorney, Brian denies any involvement, claiming he loved my mother deeply. But the United States Coast Guard has since launched a criminal investigation, seizing the Soulmate in Florida for full forensic testing.
The painful questions surrounding my mom's disappearance are far from over.
The criminal investigation into my mother's disappearance is still very active. And our desperate questions about what really happened that night only keep mounting. Among those who can shed some light is Blaine Stevenson, someone who knew them well and stayed in contact with Brian after my mom went missing. Blaine told us that he and his wife first crossed paths with my mom and Brian while boating in Florida.
They met at a quiet anchorage one night, both of them seeking shelter ahead of an approaching storm.
Later on, they reconnected in southern Florida, spending quality time together and forming a genuine friendship. It was built around their shared lifestyle on the water. Blaine describes his wife and my mom as remarkably similar, an instant connection. He says his relationship with Brian was always positive. That's what makes his growing doubts about Brian's story so crucial. Blaine's connection with Brian was built on shared experience, not deep personal ties. A shared military background gave them common ground, though much of their friendship developed over social media. In the years that followed, when news broke that a woman was missing in the Bahamas, Blaine and his family had no idea she was someone they knew. That changed late one evening when his wife came upstairs in tears. She had just realized the missing woman was my mom. They contacted my stepfather immediately. He didn't answer at first, but called back shortly after. What followed was a phone conversation lasting nearly an hour, one that was recorded and would later fuel serious doubts. At the time, however, Blaine just wanted to understand what had happened. He pulled up marine charts, trying to make sense of Brian's story as he heard it for the first time. When Blaine first recorded that conversation with my stepfather, suspicion was the last thing on his mind. The recording was purely practical. My stepfather's story jumped between Hopetown, Elbow Cay, and other areas, making details hard to follow.
Blaine began sketching things out, pulling up charts,
Trying to piece together a clear picture so he and his wife could coordinate a search effort through a WhatsApp group they started on Brian's behalf. That recording was simply a reference tool, something to check when details got confusing.
At that early stage, Blaine's only focus was helping a friend in crisis. He was careful not to press Brian too hard.
When someone is dealing with a devastating loss, the priority is to listen, not interrogate. Blaine made no accusations and asked no challenging questions on that call. He only wanted to gather enough information to be useful from a distance.
Any doubts came much later, but by the end of that first call, something shifted for Blaine.
Several details in my stepfather's story didn't line up. The life vests stood out immediately.
Brian mentioned that neither of them wore one, which might make sense for experienced sailors.
But then he added that 2 Coast Guard required life vests were stored on the dinghy.
For Blaine, that raised an immediate question. If the vests were right there, why weren't they used?
Then came the timeline around sunset.
Brian described losing sight of my mom once darkness fell.
But his timeline of when that happened didn't match what an experienced boater would expect. The sequence of events, as Brian told it, simply couldn't form a coherent picture. Blaine is careful to separate concern from accusation. His focus, he says, has always been one thing: finding my mom.
But the account he heard that night lacked the logical flow you'd expect when recounting real events.
They kept talking after that call. Brian sent Blaine pictures, the exact same photos later posted online, pointing to where he claims my mom disappeared. He also texted to confirm he passed information along to the search and rescue teams. But all communication with Brian stopped after April 7th. The next day, police took Brian in. That's when Blaine decided to release their recorded phone call. Since Brian was unable to speak publicly, Blaine felt the audio could guide people to search the right spots for my mom. Our only priority back then was finding my mom. In those early days, we truly hoped she was still alive out there, stranded, tired, but alive. Our rescue teams were active that Sunday morning, searching for hours right alongside Brian. But we still wonder how thorough and how far that search actually went. But after that first Sunday morning, no other official searches were ever confirmed. We don't even know if they secretly kept looking. What raises serious questions is the massive communication breakdown.
Security camera footage from a local business
Reportedly showed exactly what my mom wore that night. Details that should have gone straight to Bahamian search and rescue. Instead, we only learned about it from the news.
That kind of disconnect is impossible to explain.
Why did Bahamian police lock Brian up for 5 days? That kind of hold means investigators had serious doubts about his story. Do the authorities know things they aren't telling us? And is that what is stopping them from searching for my mother? For those of us who love her, only one thing matters. My mom is still missing.
While everyone else focuses on the criminal investigation,
Our supporters are still fighting for an organized search in the Bahamas. We worry that the legal battles are swallowing up the energy to bring my mom home. My mother deserves a proper search, no matter what happened out on that water. Our pleas for answers from Bahamian police have produced nothing, except for a few brief press releases. They have not shared a single word with our family about why they called off her search. We just want answers. We want direct access, and we want my mom found. The Bahamian police only put out 3 statements: that my mom disappeared, Brian was held, and then he was let go. That is literally it.
and as for where Brian is right now, nobody seems to know.
People close to him say his behavior after my mom vanished shifted in a very strange way, completely unlike the man they used to know.
What also raises red flags is how quickly Brian hired a lawyer in Michigan and held a press conference.
To us and everyone watching, that whole sequence felt staged. My mom remains missing. And this endless silence is only deepening our nightmare.
That attorney's press conference felt incredibly strange to me.
They only answered 3 questions for my stepdad, while he stayed completely hidden. At that time, my mom's case was already fading from public attention, making his decision to suddenly speak out so incredibly confusing. Then, moving their sailboat Soulmate to Florida drew massive attention, while my stepdad stayed totally out of sight. Looking back, everyone who knew my stepdad recalls his pattern of intense, aggressive online behavior, which back then just seemed like some ordinary political passion. But now, it paints a scary picture of a man with a very volatile side, one that wasn't always visible in person. And as for how he treated my mom, those close to them are still trying to piece that part together. Everyone who knew my mom describes her so warmly, as someone genuinely loved by everyone around her. The weather that night has become a major point of argument. Several experienced captains familiar with the area confirmed the weather got bad, but the timing is absolutely critical. Security footage of the area shows that when he claims my mom went overboard, the weather hadn't even gotten bad.
That severe weather came much later.
This specific detail matters so much for our search efforts. It changes everything about where my mom might have drifted and what the water did in those following hours. I'm not ignoring the people who actually experienced that rough weather, but the video evidence shows the timeline my stepdad described just doesn't match when things actually got bad. The weather timeline is still one of the most disputed parts of her case. Evidence shows the water was calm when my stepdad says it happened, and the rough conditions didn't hit until much later. These 2 stories must make sense if we ever want to find out what happened. As for my stepdad's sailing skills, people who went out with him say he was highly experienced and confident. Blaine credits my stepdad's guidance with helping him survive a dangerous storm of his own. A sailor with that much experience, especially handling a dinghy in rough conditions, should easily have known how to save my mom in an emergency. That's exactly why his story is so hard for me to believe. My stepdad's cold composure in that recorded phone call raised so many red flags, but Blaine avoids jumping to conclusions. That phone call happened about 2 days after my mom disappeared, and what he did during those hours is still a mystery. Everyone handles grief differently, and Blaine admits he doesn't know what that kind of loss feels like. But one specific detail from their friendship really stands out. Not long after they met, my mom and stepdad split up for a while. Once they reconnected, we learned that the 2 of them had completely stopped drinking, which was a massive change everyone around them noticed. That brief breakup between my mom and stepdad was much more serious than it looked. While Blaine wasn't close enough to my stepdad to get involved directly, his wife stayed in contact with my mom through it all. The messages they exchanged back then paint a very disturbing picture. My mom described Brian as getting angry and difficult, to the point where she felt she couldn't be alone with him on that boat anymore. Her message, sent around December 2023 or January 2024, has since gone completely viral online. Blaine only learned the full details of what my mom had shared after he got off the phone with Brian following my mom's disappearance. That timing made those details hit us so much harder.
Aside from their separation, no other fights between Brian and my mom have surfaced from the weeks before she disappeared.
But what stood out to everyone following Brian online was his dark intensity. In the sailing community, which is usually so relaxed and laid back, Brian's constant, aggressive political posts felt completely out of place. To everyone who knew him, he was the most aggressively political presence on their social media feeds for the last few years. For a life built around freedom and simple days on the water, his constant anger pointed to something much darker hiding beneath the surface.
All Blaine wants now is simple permission from the Bahamian authorities to conduct a real professional search for my mom. Every day without answers is another day of unbearable pain for me and the rest of our family. Without closure, this wound never fully heals.
Every piece of debris washing ashore in the Bahamas is just another wave of heartbreak for those of us who love her.
Finding my mom, no matter what we find, is the only way to close this chapter and give us the peace we deserve.
My family will keep pushing for the truth as new details emerge. If you know anything at all, please reach out to us right away.
My mom, Lynette, is still out there, and for our family,
Every single day without her is another day of unbearable uncertainty. An investigation is underway, but for those of us who love my mom, that is just not enough. We want a real, organized search that actually focuses on finding her, not just building a case. No one should just vanish without the world doing everything possible to bring them home. And we will keep fighting, tracking every update and lead in my mom's case.
thank you for standing with us.
Please, stay alert, keep sharing her story, and help us keep pushing for answers.
We need the Bahamas to give us permission
To run a thorough search of the area with professionals and our family to find my mom.